"Ma'am, I need you to step away from the table." I remember tightening both arms around him so fast the metal chair scraped across the clinic floor. Step away? Like he was dangerous. Like he wasn't the same shivering little thing I had carried under my janitor coat for the last month. The veterinarian looked at me, then at the animal pressed against my chest, and said in a voice that made my stomach drop clean through me, "Maya, this is not a dog." For a second, I honestly thought she had the wrong room. Wrong woman. Wrong life. Because 31 nights earlier, I had only been trying to keep one freezing puppy alive behind the office building I cleaned in downtown Baltimore. That was all. I wasn't trying to break the law. I wasn't trying to bring something wild into the only place I had left to sleep. And I sure as hell wasn't trying to fall in love with the one creature I would eventually have to give away. But that part came later. That part came after the alley. After the snow. After the sound. It was just past 1 a.m. on a Thursday. The kind of Baltimore winter night where the wind barrels between brick buildings and slices straight through cheap fabric. My name is Maya. I'm 40 years old. And by then, I had gotten used to being the kind of woman people never really saw. Lawyers left coffee rings on conference tables I wiped clean before sunrise. Executives rode mirrored elevators while I stood holding a yellow mop bucket like part of the furniture. Security guards knew my badge number. Nobody knew I slept 12 floors above them in a maintenance closet beside industrial bleach and folded cardboard. That glass office tower on Pratt Street looked shiny enough from the harbor. Inside it, after midnight, it sounded like humming vents and loneliness. That night, I was dragging 2 swollen trash bags toward the rear dumpster when I heard it. Not barking, not whining, just one weak, torn little sound, like something trying to cry with no strength left to be heard. I stopped with my hand still on the metal door, looked toward the dumpster. At first all I saw was a gray lump half buried in black slush, wrapped in what looked like somebody's discarded hoodie. Then it moved. I wish I could tell you I rushed over immediately like some kind of saint. Truth is, people who have spent enough nights hungry in this city learn to keep walking past pain. If you stop for every broken thing in Baltimore, you drown with it. I almost turned back inside. Then the bundle made that sound again. Smaller this time. Thinner. Like life itself was slipping and asking permission to stay. I crouched beside the dumpster and peeled back the wet hoodie. Tiny black body. Fur pasted flat against ribs sharp enough to count. Snow crystals clinging to whiskers. Eyes open, but dull, cloudy, almost done arguing. His front paw twitched once in the slush like he had tried to crawl somewhere warmer and run out of road. His chest barely lifted. "Oh no, 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 baby." The words came out before I even knew I was speaking. Maybe because nobody had called me baby in 20 years. Maybe because nobody had looked at me half dead and decided I was still worth carrying either. I slid both hands under him. He felt wrong. Too limp. Too heavy in the middle, like lifting a soaked towel. The second I tucked him inside my janitor coat against my uniform shirt, his body shuddered so hard his teeth clicked once against my zipper. And right there under my chin, he made his first real sound. Not a bark. Not even a whine. Just this thin, cracked breath of a howl that raised every hair on my neck. I should have put him in a shelter. I should have called animal control. I should have done 10 smarter things than what I actually did. Instead, I looked up at the rear service entrance, clutched him tighter under the coat, and whispered into the dark fur pressed against my chest. "I got you, just don't die on me tonight." I had no idea then that I was sneaking far more than a dying puppy into that building. All I knew was that before sunrise, inside a 12th floor maintenance closet that barely fit one broken woman, I was about to fight like hell to keep one tiny heartbeat alive. And by morning, those eyes were going to open. It was just past 1 a.m. on a Thursday, the kind of Baltimore winter night where the wind barrels between brick buildings and slices straight through cheap fabric. By the time I slipped back through the rear service entrance, my fingers were so numb I could barely badge myself in. The little body under my coat was still shaking, still breathing, but barely. Every hallway camera felt like it was watching me commit some desperate little crime. I kept my head down, pushed the mop cart in front of me like a shield, and rode the freight elevator to 12. When the doors opened, the building was dead silent. No lawyers, no cleaning supervisor, just fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and my own pulse hammering in my ears. I unlocked the maintenance closet, ducked inside, and shut the door with my heel. That closet was hardly bigger than a church confessional, bleach jugs on one side, folded uniforms on the other, cardboard laid flat where I slept. I dropped to my knees, carefully opened my coat, and laid him on the cardboard. Under the harsh ceiling bulb, he looked worse than he had outside. Tiny black ribs fluttering under soaked fur. Whiskers crusted with ice. Paws trembling in weak little jerks like his body had forgotten whether to keep fighting. "Come on," I whispered. "Don't do this." I grabbed 2 old janitor rags, ran hot water from the utility sink, wrung them out, and tucked them around him. Then I dragged the portable hand dryer from the hallway bathroom, plugged it in, and aimed the low heat toward his curled body. Cheap tricks. Homeless tricks. The kind you learn when nobody is coming to save you. From my locker, I pulled the only food I had left, half a cafeteria chicken sandwich wrapped in napkins from someone's meeting upstairs. I tore off the softest piece, dipped it in warm vending machine water, and touched it to his mouth. For a second, nothing. Then, his tongue moved. 1 weak lick. Another. I laughed so suddenly it came out like a sob. That's it, baby. Funny how something so small can make you feel seen again. If you've ever known what it feels like to have nothing, and then suddenly have something to care about, you understand why I couldn't just walk away. I stayed there on the cardboard for hours, knees aching, watching his chest rise and fall. Sometime near dawn, I looked at the gray ash smeared from the boiler vent across his wet fur, and the name slipped into my mind. "Ash," I whispered. He was asleep by then, curled tight inside the rags. But he wasn't facing me. He had turned himself, slowly, stubbornly, toward the narrow little window in the closet door, staring at the dark Baltimore skyline beyond it. And just before his eyes closed completely, he let out a faint sound. Not quite a bark. That sound sat with me the rest of the night. Not because it was loud, because it wasn't. It was too thin, too stretched, too strange to belong to something that looked like an ordinary puppy. I told myself cold did weird things to living creatures. I told myself exhaustion was making me dramatic. Then morning came, and Ash was still alive. By Friday night, he was stronger. Not strong enough to stand steady, but strong enough to lift his head when I came into the closet. Strong enough to follow me with those dark eyes every time I moved. That should have felt normal. Comforting, even. Except there was something about the way he watched that made the back of my neck tighten. Most puppies bounce, fidget, whine when they want attention. Ash didn't do any of that. He just studied. When I opened a bleach bottle, his eyes tracked my hand. When the freight elevator dinged down the hall, his ears twitched before I heard it. When footsteps crossed the marble lobby 12 floors below, he'd lift his head like some invisible wire had tugged him. And he still hadn't barked once. Not at me. Not at the building. Not at the vacuum cleaner roaring outside the closet door. Some nights on break, I'd leave the closet cracked open and let him wobble a few feet into the hallway. Instead of sniffing mop buckets or chewing loose cords like any normal rescued mutt, he'd walk straight to the narrow maintenance window at the end of the corridor. Then he would sit, perfectly still, staring out over Baltimore, at the red blinking lights near the harbor, at the dark rows of brick buildings, at the distant ribbon of highway traffic sliding past like veins of light. For long stretches, he wouldn't move at all, like he was waiting for something beyond the glass. Mr. Jenkins noticed him on the 4th night. He was the overnight security guard, 60-something, Orioles cap, bad knee, always smelled faintly like vending machine coffee. He caught me slipping Ash back into the closet and squinted down at him. "Well now," he muttered. I froze. Mr. Jenkins crouched slowly, studying the puppy's face. Ash studied him right back without blinking. After a few seconds, Mr. Jenkins stood and rubbed his chin. "That thing got eyes like it's thinking," he said. I forced a laugh. But later that night, with the city gone quiet and snow tapping softly against the service windows, a long distant howl floated somewhere in the dark beyond downtown. Ash's head snapped up, and for the first time, he answered it. By the 3rd week, Ash was no longer the half-dead little bundle I could tuck inside my janitor coat. He was growing. Wrong. Not the normal puppy kind of growing where paws get clumsy and ears look too big for the head. This was faster than that. Leaner, heavier, almost overnight. Every few shifts I'd come back to the maintenance closet with contraband cafeteria chicken or a stolen sausage biscuit from the break room vending shelf, and he looked longer. His shoulders sat higher. His legs looked too sturdy under that dark coat. And he moved different. Most puppies skid. They tumble. They slam into walls and trip over their own excitement. Ash didn't. He slipped through the narrow closet like smoke. When I cracked the door, he'd appear without sound, No nails clicking, no scrambling. Just those pale eyes finding me in the dark like he'd known I was coming before I turned the knob. I told myself it was because he was smart. I told myself a lot of things. At night, after I finished mopping the law offices on 14 and sanitizing the marble bathrooms on 10, I'd let him stretch his legs in the empty service hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The building would be dead quiet except for the distant hum of HVAC vents. Ash would trot beside me, silent, never yipping, never bouncing, just watching every shadow move under the emergency lights. One night, I found an old broken mop handle and dragged it across the floor to get him playful, the way people do with dogs. "Come on," I whispered, smiling for what felt like the first real time in months. "Get it." He pounced. For half a second it looked normal, his paws sliding, body low, tail flicking. Then his jaws clamped down. Crack. The aluminum handle snapped clean in the middle. I froze. Ash dropped both pieces at my feet and looked up at me like he didn't understand why I'd stopped laughing. A chill crawled under my uniform. He was too young for that. Too small for that. But when he stepped closer, pressing his head briefly against my knee, I swallowed the fear because fear was a luxury people with options got to have. I had Ash. That was enough. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Until later that night, when we were back inside the closet and the city lights bled faintly through the vent, he lifted his head and locked eyes with me. Not like a pet waiting for instruction. Not like something dependent. Like an equal studying the only other creature in the room. By the third week, hiding Ash inside a downtown Baltimore office tower was starting to feel like hiding a secret that had grown teeth. He was no longer the trembling scrap I could tuck inside my janitor coat. Now when I opened the maintenance closet door after my shift, a lean black body rose from the cardboard with a quiet smoothness that made my pulse jump every single time. Too fast. He was growing way too fast. "Lord, what are you eating in your sleep?" I muttered one night as he pressed his head against my thigh. His shoulders were higher. His paws looked oversized, almost wrong for a puppy that had only been alive in my care a matter of weeks. And people were beginning to notice. Miss Carla from accounting wrinkled her nose when she saw fur on my uniform sleeve in the break room. "You got a dog now, Maya?" I snatched my arm back. "Just lint." She gave me that look people give when they know you're lying, but don't care enough to dig. Mr. Jenkins noticed next. Ash had slipped his nose through the closet crack while I was refilling paper towels, and Mr. Jenkins nearly dropped his flashlight. "Good grief," he whispered. "That thing's bigger than last Tuesday." "He's fine," I said too quickly. Mr. Jenkins leaned closer, squinting. "Maya, that ain't moving like no regular puppy." The words sat in my chest like ice. That same night, while Ash dozed near my mop bucket, I made the mistake of posting one blurry picture from my old prepaid phone onto a dog breed forum at the public library. Just curious what mix this puppy might be. I expected strangers to say shepherd, lab, maybe husky. Instead, the comments rolled in fast. "That's not a normal dog. Wolf hybrid maybe? Look at the eyes. Be careful." I slammed the phone face down. People are quick to judge what they don't understand. But if you've ever loved something others told you to fear, then you know. It's not that simple. Some stories deserve to be held on to, not ignored. Ash lifted his head then. Those pale eyes fixed on me like he knew every word I wasn't saying. The next morning, as I wheeled trash toward the freight elevator, Mr. Jenkins quietly slipped a business card into my hand. "A low-cost veterinary clinic on North Avenue. You need somebody to look at him," he said. And for the first time since I found Ash, I realized maybe I did. I took Ash to the clinic on my night off, which meant sacrificing $6.50 I had been saving in crumpled singles inside my locker. The bus ride up North Avenue felt longer than it was. Ash sat on the floor between my boots, leash loose in my hand, silent as always. No whining. No restless circling. Just those pale eyes moving from passenger to passenger, door to window, window to door, like he was counting exits. An older woman across from me pulled her purse closer. I hated that. By the time we stepped into the low-cost veterinary clinic, my stomach was in knots. The waiting room smelled like bleach and wet fur. Cats cried from plastic carriers. A beagle barked itself hoarse in the corner. Ash didn't either. He stood beside my leg, still as carved stone. The receptionist glanced up, smiled automatically, then looked again. "That's a beautiful dog," she said, except it came out sounding more like a question. We were taken into an exam room 10 minutes later. Dr. Simmons, a thin woman with silver glasses and tired eyes, reached down to check his gums. Ash didn't snap, didn't flinch. He just watched her hand with an intensity that made even her pause. She felt his chest, his jaw, lifted one paw, then stepped back. How old did you say he was? Maybe a month with me, I answered. He was tiny when I found him. Dr. Simmons frowned. His bone structure says something different. A cold thread slid down my spine. She moved around him once more, studying the narrow muzzle, the oversized paws, the silence. Then she opened the door and called into the hallway. Rachel, can you ask Dr. Feldman to come in here? That was the moment my palms started sweating. Dr. Feldman was introduced as a wildlife behavior consultant who occasionally worked with the clinic on exotic cases. He didn't try to pet Ash. He just crouched across the room and watched him, long enough to make me uncomfortable. Finally, he stood. Maya, he said gently, I can't confirm anything without testing, but there's a strong chance this animal may be a hybrid. I blinked. Hybrid? Part domestic dog, part wild canid. The room suddenly felt too small. He kept talking, city ordinances, liability. What happens when animals like this are misunderstood, confiscation cases, shelters unequipped to handle them? But the words started blurring together. All I could focus on was Ash standing there, pressed lightly against my knee. Dr. Simmons drew a blood sample while I held his head. He never fought, never made a sound. And as the red vial filled, Dr. Feldman said quietly, results could take a couple weeks. That was how the waiting began. 2 weeks can feel like 2 years when every day is spent pretending nothing is changing. I went back to mopping marble floors. Back to sleeping in that narrow maintenance closet with Ash curled beside the mop buckets. Back to telling myself that blood tests were just blood tests, and people in clinics liked using dramatic words. But denial gets harder when the animal next to you is nearly knee-high and can snap his head toward a sound 3 hallways away before you hear it yourself. By the time Dr. Simmons called, my stomach dropped before I even answered. Can you come in tonight? She asked. No explanation. Just that. The bus ride to the clinic felt colder than the January air outside. Ash sat beside me, bigger now, his dark fur brushing my leg, calm enough to make me feel crazier. Inside the exam room, everything moved too slowly. Dr. Simmons was at the computer. Dr. Feldman stood with his hands in his coat pockets. Neither of them smiled. I lowered myself onto the plastic chair, fingers twisted tight in Ash's leash. Nobody spoke for several seconds. You ever notice how silence can get so loud it starts sounding like bad news before anyone opens their mouth? Dr. Feldman finally turned the monitor toward me. Colored charts. DNA percentages. Scientific words I couldn't understand. Then he exhaled. Maya, his voice was careful now. This isn't a dog. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain rejected the sentence on impact. What do you mean it's not a dog? I found him behind a dumpster, not in a zoo. Dr. Simmons leaned forward. He's a high-content wolf hybrid. Mostly wolf, with some domestic lineage. I stared at them. Then at Ash. Ash stared back, unblinking, as if this had absolutely nothing to do with him. Dr. Feldman continued, slow and clinical. Animals like this require acreage, reinforced containment, specialized handling. In Baltimore city limits, keeping one without permits could lead to confiscation. If neighbors report him, if he injures someone, if animal control gets involved. His mouth kept moving. I heard maybe every 5th word. Illegal. Liability. Unsuitable environment. Potential danger. Each one landed like another brick on my chest. This tiny freezing thing I had hidden under my janitor coat. This creature I had fed chicken scraps and slept beside on cardboard had never been what I thought he was. My hands loosened on the leash. For a second, I honestly felt like the room tilted. Ash pressed against my knee. Warm. Solid. Real. And I sat there staring at the screen, unable to process how the only living thing that had become mine suddenly wasn't something I was allowed to keep. I did not surrender Ash that night, or the next, or the 3 nights after that. I went back to the 12th floor closet and held on harder, like denial could somehow change DNA. Ash still slept beside me, his long body now taking up half the cardboard. He still nudged my hand when I cried where nobody could hear me. He still followed me down dim service hallways like I was the only person in Baltimore worth trusting. And that was the problem. He was all I had. No apartment. No family calling to check in. No husband waiting on the other side of a hard season. Just a wolf creature that had chosen me in the dark. But every article I read at the public library said the same thing. These animals do not belong in confinement. They need land, pack structure, open sky. I hated every sentence. Still, I kept reading. That was how I found a sanctuary outside West Virginia that specialized in rescued wolf dogs from illegal breeding cases. They agreed to evaluate him. 3 days later, after 2 buses, 1 borrowed ride from Mr. Jenkins's cousin, and a silence so heavy I thought it might crush me, I stood at the front gate with Ash on a leash. The place stretched wider than anything I'd seen in years. Rolling fenced acreage, pine trees, hills dusted with frost, enclosures built like pieces of wilderness. From somewhere deeper inside came the sound of other animals. Low calls, sharp howls. Ash froze. My heart dropped. He pulled forward, not backward toward me. Forward. A woman named Denise from the sanctuary opened the inner gate and said softly, "Let's see what he chooses." Chooses. Like I was about to lose an election I never wanted held. We walked him toward a transition yard where 3 other wolf dogs paced along the far fence, lean bodies moving with the same eerie silence I had watched grow inside him. Ash's ears lifted. His entire posture changed. He looked awake in a way I had never seen. I crouched beside him, fingers buried in the thick fur at his neck. "Hey," I whispered, voice shaking. "Stay with me." But when Denise unclipped the lead, Ash didn't press into my chest, didn't circle back to hide behind my legs. He stepped away, one cautious step, then another. Then he trotted toward the others like he had just heard his real name for the first time. I stayed kneeling in the frozen dirt, hands still hanging in the air. And as I watched him disappear into a world that matched the wildness in his eyes, the truth finally broke through me. Ash belonged here. I don't remember how long I stayed on my knees after Ash walked away. Long enough for the cold to soak through my janitor pants. Long enough for Denise to quietly step back and give me space. Ash had stopped near the fence line with the others. One gray, one tawny, one almost white. They circled him once, noses working, bodies tense. Then something shifted. No growling. No panic. Just acceptance. Ash glanced back at me. Those pale eyes found mine across the frozen yard. I swallowed hard and forced myself to smile even though my face felt like it was cracking. "You're okay," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me from that distance. "You don't have to come back." For weeks, he had followed every footstep I took through service corridors and alleyways. Every turn, every pause. Now he stood there looking at me and stayed where he was. That hurt worse than if he had cried, because in that stillness was the answer I had been fighting since Baltimore. He had never needed smaller walls. He had needed a bigger world. I stood up on shaking legs and walked back toward the gate alone. Didn't call his name. Didn't make it harder. Some of us spend our whole lives holding on, even when we know we shouldn't. But if this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to let go of something you love just to do right by it, then don't just forget this moment. Carry it with you. The ride back to Baltimore felt emptier than any night I had ever slept in that maintenance closet. For the first time, there was no quiet breathing beside me. No pale eyes waiting in the dark when I opened the door. Just cardboard. Mop buckets. Silence. 3 weeks later, Denise called and said I could visit. So I went. This time when I stepped up to the sanctuary fence, I saw him before anyone pointed him out. Ash tore across the hillside like a shadow finally given room to become itself. Long legs eating distance. Black coat flashing between pine trunks. Powerful and sure. He stopped when he saw me. Ran to the fence. Pressed his nose once through the wire into my fingers. Recognition. Love. Then he turned and bounded back toward the others. I laughed through tears I couldn't stop. Because for once, something I loved was exactly where it was supposed to be. I didn't lose him. I gave him the life he was always reaching for.